Thank you for joining this session of JA's Virtual Career Speaker Series. We're thrilled today to have with us Rod Dorsey, and Rod Dorsey is a lead systems engineer and functional area manager at Lockheed Martin. So engineer types, we're talking to you today, and we have someone who's got some great insight on a career path in that field. And Rod, welcome. We would love to hear from your perspective, your career story leading to your role right now at Lockheed Martin. If you could just walk us through the beginnings of your career and how you got to Lockheed Martin today.
Okay. Well, it's just a pleasure to be with everybody here today. Hopefully I can share some insights in my journey, and everybody's journey is going to be different. It depends on what your interests are and how you grew up and the opportunities that are offered to you, and those can come at you in any number of ways. And I'll try and kind of share some of the unique aspects of how I got to where I am today. As was mentioned, I work as a systems engineer for Lockheed Martin. And what that really means is that right now I'm working with something called the X Labs. And what we do is we do research and development work for the Missile Defense Agency. And we take small experiments and we run them through sort of the design, what is it we want it to do. Then we figure out what sort of technologies and math and physics and things might apply to that particular problem set. And then we'll put together a draft of some software and we'll run it through some testing. And then we actually get to do a live test in a lot of cases where we'll have a live missile shot and we get to see how everything works. And if it all works, we bundle it up in a package and we add that capability or that technology to one of our existing programs. So really it's about working with the customer, deciding what they need that's different and new. And sometimes the situation or the problem set changes. And so we have to be prepared for that and apply our smart folks to fixing new problems. And it's a very exciting environment for me. The first program that I worked at with Lockheed Martin was a much longer sort of deliberate program where there was a purchase from a foreign customer, and we went over and we designed and built the system for them and went and installed it and tested it and trained them on it. And that was a 4 or 5 year process. Now the problem sets that I'm working with are interesting because we take about 2 months to go through it. So we have a conversation, we decide how we're going to sort of crack the nut, and we work through that same process. All of the steps that are involved in that, we do that in a very compressed cycle. And what that allows us to do is we can address a lot of problems in a year. Instead of taking one problem set and building the whole thing, we can actually accomplish quite a bit. And it allows us to be responsive too, because sometimes we don't know where the next issue or the next problem is going to come from. And having the ability to have the lab in place where we can go address those things and solve them in a rather quick cycle is very important, not just to Lockheed Martin and our customer, but it's important for the defense of the United States. So that gives me a lot of job satisfaction, knowing that what I do isn't just a big science experiment, it actually has a very practical application in how we address some of the things that are going on in our world today. And so that's kind of important. The journey of how I got here is a very long one, and I kind of hit on the high points. But just like you, there was a time when I was sitting in school and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life and the things that I was good at. And I'll try and sort of share some of the highlights. I grew up in Michigan and had a fairly middle class upbringing from some parents who believed in paying their bills on time and saving money for things before you bought them. And they passed those very important life lessons on to me. And it certainly served me well over the years to live within your means or below your means, and make sure that when you say you're going to do a thing or you're going to pay for a thing, that word means something. That isn't just important on the personal side, but it's also important when you start getting into the world of business, whether you're an employee, whether you're an entrepreneur, whatever it is that you decide to do with your time, knowing that knowing that when you say you're going to do a thing, that you're going to do it is extremely important. When I came through middle school and high school, I liked music a lot. I was in the band, liked the sciences, did chemistry, physics, math. And then when it came time to pick a college, honestly, I just went to the first college I applied to, and they took me on for computer science. And and I showed up at school and started that process and got through that. And I figured out about halfway through that getting into computer sciences in the early days wasn't necessarily a good fit for me. And I just actually changed majors and I went into marketing and advertising, which it will sound more interesting when you hear the rest of the story. And one of the things that was nice during the time when I went through college is you could really put yourself through if you were willing to do the work. And so, I worked a lot of long summer hours doing some interesting jobs. I was a windsurfing instructor one summer. I was a motorcycle mechanic one summer. I did a lot of time working at fast food restaurants, and I started out delivering papers even before that. I always had a job. I always had money coming in, and that was just kind of the ethos that my family passed along to me, is that if you want something, you have to go work for it. And that certainly has served me well over the years. Like getting into college too, I had an extraordinary opportunity, and it kind of came out of nowhere. I saw this bulletin board ad, and it said, "We're looking for student managers." I had no idea what a student manager was. But so I went and I talked to the lady who was the director of it was a central facility where they had a cafeteria and they had a bowling alley and they had a pool area, game room, that kind of thing. And I got in there and I had my first opportunity to be a supervisor. And so I was in charge of a crew of about 10 other student managers. And we were in charge of the security of the building. We also, on the weekends, worked at the campus police station as dispatchers. We drove a police vehicle around to check for security on the faculty and academic buildings on the weekend to make sure they were secure and nobody was getting in them. We took care of, serving the student population. And, a lot of lessons that I carried forward were learned through some mistakes that I made, honestly, as a brand new supervisor. And just because you're the boss doesn't mean that everybody has to do everything you say and all of that. And, when you learn to and I'll be honest with you, this will come out more in my story, but, I consider myself a servant leader. I'm not the guy that wags my finger and I expect everything to be done. I will lead from the front. There's nothing that I would ask one of my employees to do that I wouldn't do myself. And you have to lead by example. And that way people don't think that you're asking them to do something that's, perhaps demeaning or unnecessary or anything like that. And if you develop that relationship of trust with the team that you're working with, it just pays you back so many times over in the successes that you're going to have, no matter what it is you're doing. It really doesn't matter. And so I think that's important. And I made a couple of mistakes along the way there, and that was okay. We recovered from that. And then when I finished school, it was interesting because the college I went to, we didn't have any sort of affiliation with the military. We didn't have an ROTC program or anything like that. But we did have a career day, and we had a recruiter show up, and I had a nice chat with this fine young NCO from the Air Force who invited me to take their entrance exam. And I did so and did extraordinarily well on it, and so much so that they were pretty intent on having me come join the Air Force. And so I did. I agreed to do that, and about 6 months later, I headed off to San Antonio, Texas, to go to officer training school, and spent my 90 days there, not sleeping very much, and learning how to march and wear a uniform and that kind of thing. And a lot of those lessons that I got as a student manager came to light in a different way while I was there. They established within the training regimen, this hierarchy of, there's somebody's going to be in charge and the rest of the folks are going to work together as a team. And so all of those lessons that I learned from my time as a student manager and doing some other things really came into the forefront, and it really made for a less stressful situation than it could have been. And so kind of fast forwarding, I spent 29 years in the United States Air Force. I started off as a command and control expert, so talking to aircraft and other things that were under our control. I spent 16 years in Europe. I had 4 assignments in Germany, had an assignment in Portugal, had an assignment in Romania before I retired. Met my wife over in Germany. So, the neat thing about some of that was, not only did I get a chance to work with American teams, but then you get put in a situation where you're working with other countries. And Fortunately for me, thanks to my wife, I speak German. And so, during my time in Germany, you know, what I'm trying to get to here is communication. So we talked a little bit about teamwork, talked about, not being necessarily the boss, but at the end of the day, all of that is a product of communication, right? And so no matter whether you're working for somebody, whether you're running your own business, you have to have clear ideas that are passed between what we call stakeholders. In other words, who has an interest in what I'm doing, right? I'm going to have customers that I hope are going to come in and do some business and put money into my company, whether it's my personal company or the company that I work for. Also, I'm going to have stakeholders that are peers, right? That I do one thing and I have related, offices and shops and supporting functions that I work with, and I have to have really clear communication to make sure I'm doing for them what I need to do for them, and that they're supporting me in the way that I need to be supported. And then, everybody has a boss, right? Whether it's the company that you work for, or if you got your own business, you still have obligations. If you've got loans from banks that are supporting your facility, whoever you're leasing maybe that facility from, they're going to want to have clear communications about what it is that you do, and you have to be able to articulate that or share that in a way that that they understand, right? You've all heard the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, I'd like to take that to the next level. If you've never, and there's a great book if you ever get a chance to read it, it's called The Platinum Rule. And what that means is not do unto others as you would have them do to you. It's do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So that's one of the things that unfortunately is really hard to learn quickly. But over time, what you realize is that when you have a conversation with somebody, you think you understand what their situation is or where they're coming from, and you may only know a little bit. And so there may be a lot more behind their yes. There may be a lot more behind their no. There may be a lot more behind their, well, I really can't do that for you right now. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'll tell you that I've learned in my current job is it's humbling and it's amazing, the things that people come into work with that are in their home lives, that sick family members, debt. There's all kinds of things that people carry that could potentially keep them from being effective as a member of your team. And so business isn't just a business thing. Business is a personal thing too. And whenever you're dealing with people, you have to kind of accept them where they are. And if you do that, and if you take the time to get to know them, and you take the time to understand what's important to them, that platinum sort of level thing, not only can you make them help them be better employees or better teammates with you, you can actually make them better people. And if you have the opportunity to do that somewhere along the way, the first time that it happens, it's pretty amazing. So I finished my time in the Air Force, and I had some great jobs. I just had, amazing supervisors that saw something in me and gave me opportunities to do things I never would have imagined. I got to command at the squadron level. I got to command at the group level in Portugal, which was fantastic. I was on an air base where we were in the Azores, which is, if you've never seen it, it's an island chain in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's the only stopping off point between the east coast of the United States and the western coast of Europe. So strategically, it's very important and has been for years. And we have a wonderful relationship with the Portuguese government, who allowed us to build, at the time, the world's longest runway. It was over 13,000 feet long. And at the time, it was used for logistics to get, during World War II, to get supplies and things over to Europe. And now it serves, has served as an emergency landing spot for the space shuttle. It's also still a great logistics hub, even for the normal airplanes that fly back and forth to Europe. It's the only place in the middle of the Atlantic that they can file as an alternate for engines, for the aircraft that only have two engines. So if they have two engines and they lose one, they have to land somewhere. So Lodges is the only place in the middle of the Atlantic that they can land. So kind of a neat place. And I got a chance not just to work with a great US team, but I got a chance to work with a phenomenal Portuguese team as well. And they just loved having us there, and the shared culture and the shared priorities, if you will. We had to keep that runway going because not only was it a military runway, it was the only runway available to bring their commercial traffic in. And when you live in an island in the middle of the ocean, you're dependent on airplanes coming in to bring fresh produce in some cases, medical supplies, things that you just don't produce on an island that only has a certain number of people, and you're landlocked, and you're dependent upon those external sources and those stakeholders, right, that I talked about earlier. The people who are in that deal with you, they're an external stakeholder who makes your life on that island possible. And so it's really important to work with them. And one of the big projects that I did while I was there was we'd gone well past the time when the runway was supposed to be refurbished. It had a lot of cracks in it. It was starting to get damaged to the point where it might do damage to the aircraft that took off and landed. And so it was absolutely time. It ended up being, about a $20 million project. And, it would have been really easy for us to both sit back and go, well, we're not going to pay for that, or we're not going to pay for all of that, or, whatever. We had to come up with the funding to do that. The good news is we're able to work with the EU. We're able to work with the Portuguese government. We're able to work with the United States Air Forces and Europe Command. And between the three of us, I ended up doing a study that basically provided the math. There was a white paper that said, here's math again, coming into play. We got together a team of, from the control towers. We said, okay, how many of each type of aircraft land and take off here in a month? What kind of airplanes? How much do they weigh? And we literally went in and we engineered a table that said, this is what everybody's fair share of wear and tear on this runway is. And we put that out to the different agencies and said, here's how much money we need. And nobody even blinked an eye, because we as a team had come up with such a compelling and accurate story about what had happened to this runway and what everybody's bill was to pay on that we got it done. And it was very exciting. I learned a lot about civil engineering, and I know more about laying asphalt than I ever thought I'd know in my life. And that's kind of a key lesson that I'd like to share with everybody too, is, I think everybody has an idea of what they think they'd like to do for a living. And there's a couple of sort of interesting aspects about that. A lot of times you'll come in and at least I found that this to be true. You get hired into a job and you come in and you see what's going on around, and the job doesn't always end up being exactly what it is that you talked about when you had the interview. And that's okay. If you're a problem fixer and you walk in and the problems that you talked about during the interview aren't the problems that you see when you go there, then you'd be wasting your time trying to fix something that's not an issue. But, if they believed enough in you and felt that you were a good fit for the company and the team, fix what needs fixing. And maybe you'll learn something along the way. And, those sorts of lessons that you learn through serendipity, if you will, sometimes are the best lessons you'll ever learn. And you understand more about a problem because you had to do a little bit of homework to understand it in the first place, because maybe it's a little bit out of, the topics that you studied in school, or maybe a little bit outside of, your previous experience in a similar situation where this one has some aspects to it that are different. You just have to learn about. And that's when you lean on your teammates and you go, hey, have you ever done this before? Well, let's talk about that. Hey, do you know anybody who's ever done this before? We had a gentleman, Antonio, who at Lodges, who had done more asphalt work in his life than I could ever imagine, and he understood the aspects of content and humidity and the grind, and he taught me more about that stuff. I see people resurfacing roads around here, and I start yakking about it, and they're like, "What are you, like a nerd or what?" I'm like, "Yeah, probably," but everything I know about that, I learned from this little Portuguese man named Antonio, and it's fantastic. So never give an opportunity to do something that's different or outside of your wheelhouse. I mentioned earlier that I was a motorcycle mechanic back when I was in college, and that was one of those situations where I got hired to do something totally different. I also mentioned that I was a windsurfing instructor. Well, I got hired by an entrepreneur who was windsurfing was all the big thing. There was a company called Windsurfer. They were the only ones on the market. This gentleman, he was a banker, and he was an entrepreneur, and he decided he wanted to open up a windsurfing shop. Well, he had competition from a gentleman down the road, and I ended up meeting both of them at a city council meeting, and the gentleman down the road ended up hiring me away from Eric, my first boss, and he had this huge, I would call it sports sort of facility. He sold motorcycles, he sold jet skis, he was getting into the windsurfing business, and as it ended up, the windsurfing business didn't take off that summer, and he said, well, how would you like to work on motorcycles? Well, I rode motorcycles, and I had grown up with my dad as a home mechanic and me leaning over the engine bay, helping him out with stuff. And I knew enough about working on motorcycles that they gave me a shot at it. And they gave me the dirty, nasty business of all of those things, but I just learned an absolute ton about it. And I still ride right now, and I work on my own motorcycles. I work on my own cars, and that's just a skill set that I picked up as a young guy, and it's paid dividends because while I might not always want to do the work on my cars, when I go in and talk to a mechanic, I know what needs to be done. And if they try and tell me something's different or try and charge me something that's out of line, I know that I probably shouldn't be doing business with them. So that was a great skill set that I picked up. Let's see here. I'm kind of lost track of myself now. So we talked about lodges. So anyway, one of the neat things too, I mentioned I speak German. My last assignment in the Air Force, I actually was assigned to Romania as the defense attaché. So I wore my uniform, but I also wore a suit and tie. So I worked at the U.S. Embassy, and I was basically the military's representative there because the military is an organization that's affiliated with the government, just like the Department of State and just like the Department of Agriculture and everybody else. The military is pretty big, but we were basically there to support the objectives of the national government, which is the common defense of our country. And it was a very exciting assignment. I learned to speak Romanian before I got there, and so I had that going. And once again, I worked with a great Department of Defense team within my office. I worked with a great Department of State team. The ambassador and his deputy were just amazing gentlemen and taught me stuff that I should have learned in high school about civics and about how important that piece of the outreach arm is to our stature in the world as representatives. And we were very successful at helping companies there, at helping the Romanian military, since they were brand new NATO members, become more effective and better contributors in their obligations to that organization. And really, just the Romanian folks were so wonderful to work with, and it was a very neat experience. Both of my boys got to go to high school there with a very blended. We had kids from over 100 countries at the international school there. So they got a neat experience and got to work Habitat for Humanity in Romania, which is, you can imagine, was a high impact sort of event there. Served on the school board while I was there at the international school. So, once again, opportunities that I didn't necessarily search out, but, people thought that I was the right person for that responsibility or that job. And I went in and I ended up learning as much as I brought to the table, quite frankly. And honestly, that's one of the reasons that I was very pleased to be involved with Junior Achievement, because I think that, when you bring a diverse team like we do together with a common goal, I think that the results can't help but be really magnificent. And the thing that I love about Junior Achievement too is, as Lockheed Martin, we're very much a technology company. We put satellites in space. We build all sorts of aircraft and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're focused on STEM, right? So the science, the technology, engineering, and math, which is great. What I love about JA though is that no matter who you are, no matter what you decide to do, whether you're an accountant or whether you're a school teacher or whether no matter what you do, you have to know how to work with money, and you have to understand the financial landscape and what that means to you. And it's changing so quickly. I can't believe it. If I think back to what I came through school and college and started my professional career with versus, what I'm looking at now, things like healthcare, things like interest rates, things like housing are just markedly different than they were when I was coming up. And so I'm reaping the benefits of a very conservative financial plan, well executed at my house, and I'm very happy about that. And I've tried to, pass those lessons along to my boys as well as they get started. But I would be remiss if I didn't, take the opportunity to invest some time with all of you and have those conversations, because really at the end of the day, it's about having the conversation. Because if you don't have those conversations, you may not know what questions to ask. And if you don't know what questions to ask, you're going to get caught flat-footed at some point, and you're not going to be able to deal with a situation, whether it's something as simple as how do I get my first credit card and what do I do with it, to how do I buy my first car so that I have transportation to get to school or to work or to take care of my responsibilities. All of that stuff is so important, and to do it right at the beginning is even more important, because if you've never seen something like a mortgage table that shows the interest over time, how you shape that mortgage at the beginning drastically impacts how much money you end up paying for a house, as an example, or a car. It can also mean, if you do things right up front and you start paying yourself first and save money, that same math will make sure that 10 and 20 years down the road that you have enough money put aside to be very comfortable when you have to make your big financial decisions for, family and for retirement and those sorts of things. So, we really, really want to have those conversations with you now, because time is on your side. The sooner you get started doing these things properly, the more benefit you're going to have from them down the road, and the more opportunities it'll offer to you. Whether you decide to go work for a company, or whether you decide to follow your own path and start your own company, the rules are no different. The costs are the same. The cost of money is the same to borrow, right? So yeah. And once I left the military, I actually went through a couple of consulting gigs where I'd like to say that's entrepreneurial. It's not really entrepreneurial, but I actually worked in the oil and gas industry when I first got out. And you go, what on earth do you know about oil and gas there, Rod? Well, it wasn't that I knew a lot about oil and gas, but what I did know about was managing risk and doing safe operations. Because, as you might imagine, in the military, we did a lot of things that were inherently dangerous. It's just part of the deal, right? So, but what we also do is we understand those processes so well that we're able to communicate amongst the team members in a way that we can mitigate or even eliminate, in some cases, the risk that's involved there. So if you think of some place like an aircraft carrier, and you've all probably seen, Top Gun, some of the movies where they're taking off and landing aircraft on this what looks to be a very, very small area. I've been aboard a couple of them, and it's stunning to watch the precision with which they do their launch and recovery operations. It's just amazing. But you look around, and if you really look closely, there's a lot of opportunity for bad things to happen here. It's true, right? But yet they're still able to execute those operations day after day after day. Same thing on a normal flight line. I flew in several different aircraft while I was in the Air Force, and we take off and land at all kinds of different facilities. But the communication that we had amongst the crew and the ground support folks and the towers and air traffic control and everybody else that we dealt with, when that communication was crisp and clear and everybody understood what was going on, the amount of risk that was present at any given time was reduced. Well, what we did when we went out to the oil rigs, and I went out to oil rigs in the middle of the Black Sea because I spoke Romanian and I knew about safety, and so they said, Rod's the guy. We're going to send Rod out there and talk to these Romanian guys and make sure that we're performing these operations in a way that isn't going to eliminate risk necessarily, but it's certainly going to bring it down to a level that we're all comfortable with. And at the end of the day, we can all say that we're doing the best that we can to make this operation safe. And so I did that for a while, and the price of gas went down and training dollars went away, and so I got away from doing that. And then I got into a similar sort of opportunity with another company that was doing that kind of training with United Airlines. And we were talking, and I mentioned communication earlier, and stakeholders and teams. This is where this came into play again. The concern of the airlines was, if you didn't know this, when you turn 62 years old, you have to stop flying commercially. You can no longer fly for United or Southwest or whoever. But what they found is there's this large portion of their pilot team that was on the cusp of turning 62. And so they were hiring this just massive number of younger pilots to come in. And their concern was that they didn't want all of that great experience that the older generation had not to get passed along. And what we do the same thing at Lockheed Martin. If I'm going to leave my job and go to another job, they want to see a knowledge transfer plan for me. In other words, what is it you do every day that somebody else is going to have to do when you go away? And what do they need to know to do that, right? Super important, because otherwise, you have this person coming in and they have no idea what they're supposed to do, and they have to learn it the hard way, and that's no good, right? So communication is super important. And so what we did with United Airlines was we created a curriculum, and we did a 1-week course for all 11,000 pilots in their entire operation all over the world. We did it in 5 different locations. We had one guy going to Guam to do everybody over there, and we did it in a couple places here in the United States and over in Europe and in the Far East as well. And having those conversations was interesting because we found that the younger generation, they communicated in a different way, and they, a lot of use of technology, whereas the older heads tend to use a lot of paper and pencil and, just that sort of thing. But, at the end of the sessions that we had, it was really eye-opening to see the clarity of communications that was there versus when we started. And so hugely successful. We really thought that was a world winner. And we've also done a similar thing, not with the pilots, but we've also done it with the maintainers. And in fact, earlier this year, I actually did a 1-week trip for the company over to the Philippines, to Manila. Lufthansa Airlines, the German airline, actually has a maintenance and repair facility over there that they operate with a Philippine crew that does all the maintenance. And so they were very interested in the safety practices that we were using in some of our other material, and they wanted us to come out and work with their teams. And at the end of the day, it was exactly what I've been talking about. It was all about communication, all about accountability, understanding what you owe your stakeholder next to you, what they owe you at the end of the day. Things like, when I go to the tool bin and the parts bin to pick up the tools and parts I need to do my job for the day, do I have everything there and is it accounted for, and did I sign for it? So that at the end of the day, I'm going to go and I'm going to turn all those tools and old parts back in, because what I don't want to do is have things laying around. Because when you start up a jet engine and there's tool laying in front of it, it'll suck it up into the motor and it'll totally ruin the engine. It's tens of millions of dollars to replace those things. So Lufthansa was very interested in the sort of impact we could have in improving the workplace from a safety standpoint, from a lack of damage to equipment and personnel standpoint. And that was a really rewarding sort of event too. And we ended up teaching a cadre of instructors for them to stay in place and to continue teaching those things to the team over there. And then the current job that I'm working in now down at the lab, I actually just started about a month ago. And before that, as I mentioned, I was working with a foreign customer over in the Middle East. And so I spent a great amount of time last year over there, hands-on, working with them. And working with someone who speaks English, but it isn't their first language, has its challenges, as you might imagine. And sometimes you have to spend a lot of time even just talking about a word to make sure that it means the same thing to them that it means to you. And having the patience and the willingness to invest in those conversations is very, very important. So I guess, sort of if I had to wrap up some highlights, I'd say, don't ever give up an opportunity to try something new. You might love it. You just haven't thought about doing it. And if you don't, take the opportunity to learn everything you can from it, because even though you may not ever want to do it again, having knowledge of how that thing is done might help you be of assistance to a stakeholder that you're working with who does do that thing right next to you. You don't do it anymore, but you're going to be dependent on somebody else doing that. And so having that understanding is important. I would say have a good financial plan going into whatever it is that you decide to do. There's a lot of when I got out of the military, there was a lot of we did some transition courses about how to leave the military and figure out what you're going to do next. And I kind of got an earful of now's the time to chase your dream and all that kind of thing, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to do it in a responsible way. You can't just go in with no idea of what it's going to cost and what the responsibilities are going to be. And, there's always, some sort of government regulations that come into play, workplace regulations, human resources, all of those things that you'll learn as an employee will help you later on down the road if you decide you want to go out on your own. And that's important. And then I guess, probably the big thing is, chances are, unless you're maybe a computer coder who gets to work from home and you're all by yourself, you're going to deal with people every day, and you're going to deal with your teammates, and you're going to deal with customers, and sometimes those customers are easy and sometimes they're not, right? And so having the ability to, have a good objective conversation and treat people with respect is so important. And sometimes, you can turn a no into a yes. I remember in college I did a sales class, and it's just, I'm not a sales guy. But when I got done with it, they're like, "You are such a good sales guy." And what I didn't realize is, my impression, my experience with sales was on the customer end. And so, oftentimes you have somebody who's really pushy or really trying to, work a deal that you're not pleased with or interested in. And so it kind of gives you this sort of negative impression of salespeople. But, the approach that I took was, I'm going to, you don't even, that I treated them with respect. I respected their wishes. I told them a story that I thought was compelling, and left it up to them to make their decision at the end. And I'd get done, and invariably I was able to present things in a way that showed the relative merit of what I was offering versus perhaps what they thought they came in for, And even if they don't get a buy, it gives them something to think about, right? So that's just one example, I did, as I mentioned, come through a marketing and advertising program. So what is advertising other than, trying to get people to buy things they don't want or need, right? So, is that something I ended up doing for a living? No. But I will tell you that there were times when, as a staff officer in the military or as a commander, I had to go to my boss and make a case for why I needed to do a thing, or why I needed to get additional resources for something, or why I had this employee that was the best thing that I'd ever seen in my life and that they needed to be promoted early. And what is that other than sales, right? It's telling a compelling story in a way that is meaningful to the recipient and makes them understand why what you want to do is a good use of time and treasure. And so, although I didn't end up doing that for a living, I certainly took that skill set with me, and it certainly has served me over the years. And, at the end of the day, one other thing I'll share with you, one job that I had in the military, very, very demanding. It was kind of a special ops sort of thing. I had a team there who, they were an amazing bunch of guys. And one of the takeaways that I had from that, and this is something you probably need to consider as you're trying to think about what you want to do, is especially if you want to do something that's a really high bar. I'd never discourage anybody from taking a look at those things, but what I found is that I had folks that fell into two groups. There were folks that were absolutely capable of doing the job, but they weren't very motivated. And then there was another group who they literally wanted to do it with every fiber of their being, and they just didn't have the natural skill set. They weren't either mentally or physically at the level where they could safely do what it is that we needed them to do and be effective, and not just be effective, but be successful, because that's really important as well. Is you don't want to get into something that you're going to get a C- at every day, right? If you find a thing that you love and the thing that you're good at, and it doesn't take all the life out of you, you have enough energy left at the end of your day to pursue hobbies and take care of your family and give back to your community and things like that. That's a sweet spot that I would recommend that you try and find, because I think that's very important. But the frustrating thing was, the folks that really wanted to do it and just didn't have the capacity. That's a very difficult discussion to have with somebody, because I don't ever want to tell anybody they can't do anything. But what I did tell them is that, they weren't going to be as successful as they probably wanted to be, and help them, take a look at some other things that I thought would be a better fit. And they were so much happier, when they got into that and got going. And like I said, had that extra capacity at the end of a work day to play in a softball league and, go to their kids' stuff and build a, project car, whatever they wanted to do with their spare time, right? And the other example of them sort of overreaching was that was all they did. And sometimes it took a toll on relationships and things like that too. So made it hard on the family, and that's no good either. So anyway, that's just a kind of a few thoughts. I think, I don't know how many of my questions, your questions I've answered, Angie, and I've gone on and on. Is there anything else you think I ought to hit on? Or?
You've answered so many questions, and you're fascinating. You're an incredible storyteller, so you could add that to your list as well. Just the way that you tell your stories is powerful. I feel like I just watched a movie of your life, quite frankly. That is really impressive. And I have millions of questions. I don't know that we have time for all of them. One of the things I noticed about your journey is, originally we talked about your customer, and it was the U.S. government right now. That's your customer. But throughout your career, you have served so many different cultures, and you talked literally about speaking the same language in Romania and Germany, and how that could help you in partnership. One of our lessons is global marketplace, as you might know, Jay, global marketplace.
Yep.
And in there, we talk a lot about cultural competency and what it means to culturally work with, a partner professionally. Are there tips and insight that you could share from your journey about being culturally competent? Because it sounds to me like you were of service to so many different cultures across the world, and the way that you were able to, project manage and lead and communicate and come up with strategies and build your teams, really had to do a lot with building that cultural competency. Is there something students can do now or can keep in mind if international work is something that they're hoping for in their futures?
Absolutely. No. And anybody who walks through the door thinking they know everything about how it's going to go is really in for a rude awakening. Honestly, this trip that I did to the Philippines earlier this year, I'd never been to the Philippines. I'd spent a little bit of time in the Far East. I was in Okinawa some, in Japan some. But the first thing I did was I went to the library and I bought a cultural how-to guide, kind of a, Philippines for Dummies, because I wanted to know, if you don't know, I kind of have touched on it throughout the discussion, is, that platinum thing of doing things in a way that is most important to that other person. If you don't know what's culturally important to a particular group of people in a different country, then you may think you think you're doing the right thing and you're missing the mark even by a little, when it could be avoided. When I went to the Philippines, what I found was interesting is family and relationships are huge there. And if you strike a personal note with the folks that you're working for, all of a sudden there's a sense of obligation between the two of you that I'm not going to let you down because we're more than just business colleagues, we're friends now. And that was important to know. The fact that one of their, and I found this to be the case almost everywhere I've gone. Food is an enormous international, like it's a common denominator, right? If you sit down and you break bread with somebody and let them share their local food and their local cuisine and tell you about what's special about, how they make their stuff, and you spend the investment of time doing that with them, it's powerful. It's really powerful. And, I had the benefit of the language in a couple of situations, but you don't have to speak the language. It's having the cultural sensitivity or taking the time to understand what makes them tick, what's important, I think is far more impactful than that. So, go to the library, that's what it's there for. Like I said, I read through and it was just very, very interesting to me, because it's one thing to know that, sort of the demographic information about a country. So, I went to the Philippines, it's 82% Catholic, and, you can go through those sort of numbers. But what's more important is, kind of figuring out how they tick. How do they see the world? What would they perceive as being a benefit or a good thing for them? And having those woven into how you have a conversation or how you present material or how, you try and compel, right? So whenever you talk to somebody or, you give a briefing or whatever, it's going to be to entertain, to inform, or to compel or to educate kind of thing, right? So you got to figure out what those conversations are going to look like. And sometimes, especially in the Far East, what you'll find is that you don't get right to business. The first thing you do is you just spend time with them, or as we call it, drinking the tea. Same thing in the Middle East, They don't want to talk about business right away. They want to sit down. They want to know about your family. They want to kind of get to know you as a person before, you really start talking about business. And having the patience for that, which is not something Americans sometimes are very good at, will set you apart from other people who are trying to accomplish the same thing. If you're willing to sort of invest that time in learning, in experiencing, and getting a feel for things, it goes a really long way, and it builds that trust that you want to have with somebody, that you're a teammate or customer or whoever you're going to be working with. It's very, very important.
Rod, well, this is fascinating, and I want to congratulate you on a life well lived and a career that really, as a servant leader in service to others, I mean, so critically important. And I love that you led with that and talked about that. So important, building teams, knowing how to communicate, understanding those cultural competencies, breaking bread before you get some of the work done, if that's what it takes. But what a fascinating career journey you've had, and I hope that students are inspired by this. I'm sure they will be, to take their own journeys. And imagine if you hadn't said yes to the gentleman who came in from the Air Force. I mean, let's just imagine how your world could have been different if you weren't just open to that idea, right?
Right. Yeah, and I'm not done yet. That's the good news.
That's right. That's right.
Lots to do. Yep.
Lots to do.
I got a phenomenal new team out at the lab. I'm very excited about that. And it's interesting because you didn't hear me use the word engineering or technology in my educational resume, right? But I learned a lot of that along the way in my Air Force training. And fortunately, you're working with radars and electronics and all that sort of thing. And I have to thank my dad. I mean, he let me hang over the fender in the car, and I learned how to set points and all that stuff as a young guy. And I firmly believe that when it comes to things like that, there's nothing I can't do if I'm willing to put my effort to it, and go to the library or do a hands-on thing or do classes and things. And I'm still learning. I still get excited about things. I work around a bunch of physicists and programmers, and it's a little intimidating sometimes, but I've learned to communicate them with them in a way that they appreciate, and sometimes they're rather introverted, but I gain trust with them, and they'll come to me with anything, and I can ask them to share with me what they're doing, and they'll learn to sort of break it down for me in a way that I can understand it. So I'm learning at the same time, which is just phenomenal. And I'm learning how to code a little bit, and doing some of that stuff now. So it's very exciting. I understand how things work. Sometimes I don't know the math behind it, but there's sort of different layers. And don't let anybody ever tell you that you're not smart or you're not intelligent, because there's different kinds of it, right? There's book smarts. There's sort of people that are visual learners and can look at a problem set and break it down. There's people that can read people really well and understand where problems lie and how those can perhaps be dealt with. And so just because you don't pick up a thing in a certain way that you think makes you less intelligent, everybody has something to offer. And when you have a team where you can blend all of those things together, the synergies, and it's a superpower. Quite frankly, it's a superpower, right? And you have a team that operates and understands everybody's weaknesses and strengths and honors those and brings those to the table. There's nothing you can't do. So
that is brilliant.
I'm excited to see what everybody's going to do with all of this and what they do with their future, and I'll be looking forward to seeing some of that.
Yeah, and we're excited to see where your road goes next too. So more great projects. Rod, thank you so much, and thanks for sharing your story with students. And students, just so you know, Rod Dorsey is likely available to have any conversations with you about his career choices and his path. And so feel free to contact our office if you'd like more information from Rod, or if you have any follow-up questions at all. Yeah. Rod, thanks so much. And students, thanks so much for joining us. And we will see you at our next virtual career series.